One of the most important things you can do when you're just learning a new camera is to become familiar with all of the external buttons. I know it seems pretty obvious, but I can't overstate how important this is. Once you know what the button is and what it does, it really gives us the key to taming our camera. I'm going to take you over all the buttons and emphasize which ones are more important than others. As you know, this is the shutter button. It is a two-phase button, meaning that the button has two positions. The first is a halfway depression, and the second is a full depression, which will actually take the picture. You need to train your finger to feel where that first depression point is. It's a very soft click when you push down. It's almost like you're just breaking through an initial stress point, and if you push it down all the way, it'll actually take the picture. I can't emphasize how important it is to train your finger to feel the sensitivity between these two positions. The second most important button is near where your right thumb would rest. This is the command dial. You will notice that it rotates to the left or right, and you will use it to change your shutter speed and aperture. The third most important button is on the top of the camera. It's just behind and to the right of the shutter button. It has a plus-minus sign on it, and this is called your exposure compensation button. Next, we have the mode dial, which determines what mode we are shooting in. Out of all the buttons on our camera, we're going to use these four more than anything. I can promise you that. Let's take a look at some of the other secondary camera buttons so you know what they are and what they do. The power switch rotates around the shutter button. Directly below the shutter button, we have the info button, which will allow us to see different types of information on our monitor. This is especially useful during live view, which I will show you later. The button with the red dot is the video record button, which will record video files when we are in live view. On the side opposite of the shutter button, we have our lens release button, which we are going to press every time we rotate a lens off of our camera. The FN button can be programmed to do different things, but when you take the camera brand new out of the box, the default setting is as an ISO control button, and I would recommend leaving it that way. This is going to allow us to quickly change our ISO settings without needing to go into the menu. Just above it, we have the force flash button, which will force our flash to pop up, and holding it down will allow us to control our flash power. On the back of our camera, we have our play button, which will allow us to review our images after we take them. The menu button will allow us to access and change many of the camera's custom settings and controls. I have a special video on this DVD dedicated to the menu section. The zoom in button will allow us to magnify our images and inspect them in greater detail. The zoom out button will obviously allow us to zoom out, but it also helps with navigation through many images, as well as it acts as a help button when we go through the menus. The button with a little I is actually the change information button, and we're going to be using it quite a bit as it allows us to change our secondary shooting functions such as metering, white balance, focus modes, things of that nature. Next, we have the delete button, which will allow us to get rid of images we don't want to keep. The release mode button will allow us to control how the camera responds when we push the shutter button down all the way, whether it's a single shot, a rapid fire burst, quiet, remote, or a timed release. The multi-selector, which I also call the directional pad, will allow us to interact and select different menu items as well as change our focus points. The central OK button works very similarly to an enter button on a computer. Above our directional pad, we have a button with the letters LV, which stands for Live View. And this button will allow us to activate live view and video shooting features. The auto exposure lock, auto focus lock thumb button will allow us to lock our exposure and focus before taking the shot. This is very useful when recomposing, and I will show you how to do this a little later on in the video. Finally, we have a little tiny wheel with a plus-minus sign on it. This is the diopter adjustment control, which allows us to change the focus of the viewfinder. This is especially useful for photographers who wear glasses. So that's an overview of the camera. We've gone over all the buttons and have briefly covered what they do. I promise that if you practice, the day will come that you will feel you have complete control over your camera, and it feels really good to know how to do everything. There may come a time when you forget which button does what. Just come on back and we'll go over it again. For the rest of the DVD, we will go through each of these settings individually so you know what they are and what they do. If you found this video helpful, you may be interested in my new training video, Nikon D3200 Crash Course. I'll show you the basics and teach you how to use your camera like a pro in no time. You can order it from the following link.